All right. So first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us here. And we appreciate your patience with our technical difficulties. Welcome to our panel discussion of the Indigenous and African Diaspora of the Americas. And I am Doris Kapner, the Programs Director at the McCall Center. And this panel discussion was facilitated by Mary Valverde, who is our artist in resident currently. And this panel will be moderated by Eva Mayhabal Davis, and we are joined by Ronny Quevedo and McCall alumni William Cordova and Esperanza Cortes. So I hope I didn't butcher names too badly. You can correct me if I did. I don't want to take up a whole lot of time, so I'm going to give it to Eva, who is going to moderate the discussion.
Thank you so much for the welcome to McCall Center, all their staff for putting this together. Just wanted to take a minute to acknowledge everyone here that's present, that we're able to connect through these virtual ways and be able to continue very rich conversations that I've that I've had with y'all. And it's really just a pleasure to see y'all. And I think I just came into the platform to see everyone, and I'm just excited to hear from everyone. And I know it's been a while too. It's also really good to see folks that are jumping in on the chat, coming in from New York, from the Hudson Valley, from Mexico, and just want to share a little bit of the rundown for this evening. Each one of the artists here will be speaking on their practice of these kind of moments that they have been able to find connection, research, interests, and very deep-rooted agency of the work that they do, rooted within personal experiences, familial experiences of indigeneity in the African diaspora, as we experience it here in the United States and beyond. And very glad to be moderating this evening. We're going to start off with a couple of presentations. I encourage folks to drop in comments as well as questions in the chat, and I'll be able to take a look at those and address them towards the end of the talk as we all engage in a dialogue together. So I think we'll get started with William Cordova.
Thank you, Eva. I hope everyone can hear me. I wanted to start
yes, with the
first image. Pardon?
We hear you. You're good.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I clear?
Yes.
Okay. Can we start with the images that I sent? The order. One more. There you go. Okay. I wanted to start out with a document, an evidence of multiculturalism in the United States, because it's often a topic or a presence that is rarely understood, because American culture tends to be just black or white, one or the other. There's nothing in between. There's no gray area. And so I wanted to start out with this image. It's an article from 1972 from the newspaper called Right On. Now, this isn't the first example of multiculturalism related to contemporary visual art or contemporary culture or modern culture. But it is a point that I wanted to highlight in the presentation. So the newspaper is called Right On. It was an East Coast version of the Black Panther Party newspaper, originally published in the West Coast. And this was published in New York. We have the cover on the left side, and then one of the pages on the right called Tupac Amaru II. The article was written by Habib Tiwani, who was born in St. Thomas, where he became a a bow stick expert and a poet. Then he moved to Spanish Harlem, joined the Nation of Islam in Harlem, was Malcolm X's bodyguard, and then he joined the Black Panther Party in the late 60s in New York. He was also a well-known contributor to the Black Panther newspaper and participated in NYU and the Cooper Union poetry cooperatives throughout the early 70s. He was also fluent in Spanish and published the Moncada of the Mind in 1970 about the Moncada Barrack in Santiago, Cuba, and Island of My Mind, a selection of short poems. And the reason I share that with you is because the article that he wrote reveals a history of Tupac Amaru I, the Inca king from the 1500s. And then he goes on to elaborate his great-grandson, Jose Condorcanqui, Tupac Amaru II, who rebelled against the Spanish, along with Micaela Bastidas, an Afro-Andean general, and also his wife, in 1780. And then it goes on to address the Tupamaros movement from Uruguay, which was organized by Raúl Sendic, who was the founder of Tupamaros in Uruguay in 1963. The publication here, right on, is from 1972, where the Tupamaros were well trenched into the city of Uruguay, the capital, Montevideo. And so by sharing this article, this history, the Panthers were reaffirming their commitment, their alliance, and struggle with liberation organizations in South America, Central America, Mexico, and other parts of the world. Now, most people might think of Tupac. They don't know what Amaru means, and only related to the activist American musician, Tupac Shakur. But he was also named after Tupac Amaru II by his mom, who was also a Black Panther, Afeni Shakur. And so I grew up understanding these realities in Peru, and then coming into to the U.S. But it was mainly abstract to most people because they either knew one history or the other, but they didn't affiliate both of them or the struggles. And so when I went to undergrad, I started realizing this reality was becoming this more like an obstacle for me to carve at. And I started addressing these topics. And it wasn't enough to address it, but I needed to also incorporate historical examples, just like this newspaper article. And so I wanted to share a couple of pieces that I produced within the last 20 years, which still resonate with me. Can we see the next image? And breathe. This is a labyrinth. And well, basically, it's the title is the house that Frank Lloyd Wright built for Fred Hampton, Mark Clark, y Atahualpa. And it aligns the three individuals who were similar and struggled for liberation in different geographic locations and different historical periods in time. So I was collapsing time of two different dimensions in order to provoke the audience to connect the dots. And the piece is a labyrinth. It's a portal. It has many different entry points, and it's based on a floor plan of the house where Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were assassinated in Chicago on December 4th, 1969. And both individuals were Black Panthers. This piece was made in 2006, before it was trendy. And heavily appropriated the topic of the Black Panther Party. Of course, Atahualpa comes to mind, prompts people to ask, well, who's that? He was an Inca king who was incarcerated in a small room by the Spanish in the 1500s and forced to fill it up with gold and silver so that he would be allowed to live. But he was so important that to the Incas, to the movement, that the Spanish Pizarro still assassinated him. And then we go forward to the 20th century. The reason why Fred Hampton was assassinated by the FBI and the Chicago police is because he was too influential. He was an excellent orator. For that reason, they had to get rid of him. I'll pause there and just go to the last piece. There's a scaffolding piece. And scaffoldings represent forgiveness, time, energy, efforts, communication. It's about constructing or deconstructing. And what I did was make this piece, it's a scaffolding turned sideways with a projection and audio component. And the audio and visual components are of two films, speaking of Tupac. It's the film by Peter Spear, Tupac Thug Angel from 2002. It's the entire film, which is 93 minutes. And the audio is of another film made by Reynaldo Arenas, not the same Cuban poet. This is a Peruvian filmmaker. Reynaldo Arenas, film called Tupac Amaru, made in 1985. And it's 94 minutes long. So I played both pieces at the same time, simultaneously on a projection within the scaffolding that's been turned sideways. And I was interested in that because I wanted to make these relationships much stronger, not just imply it, but really disrupt how we observe and watch films and what those individuals in the films or the documentary represent, and how sometimes we misrepresent or misunderstand. And I guess I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. I'm going to hand the floor over to Ronny.
Hey.
Unmute. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. I said really nice things. I just want to say it's really nice to see everybody. Thanks for getting us together, Mary. And I'm looking forward to the talk. I'll try to be brief. I have 5 images. And I thought I'd start with this piece from 2014 to kind of talk about a bit of the evolution of this symbol, but also an evolution of the use of gymnasium flooring in my work. And this piece is titled Wifala in the Paint. And the Wifala is an emblem that represents, in this case, it represents one of the geographic areas of the Inca Empire. There are 4 Wifalas that represent the Inca Empire. And it's represented usually by a 7x7 square grid. You can kind of make out the 7 squares at the top. There's a diagonal pattern of white squares going from the top left to the bottom right. And so one of the reasons I was interested in this this symbol and thinking about it as it represents a past that aligns with my own geographic place of birth in Ecuador is thinking about a past that is available and unavailable at the same time. So I was thinking about a symbol that represents a geographic area, but not necessarily a past that I was very familiar with. And thinking about how these symbols, but also thinking about heraldry and the power that some imagery and some iconography can take hold. So what you also see here are the logos for the Atlanta Hawks and the Sacramento Kings, which is a bit more contemporary notion of heraldry and thinking about the symbols that represent allegiance in more contemporary terms. Another thing that came from this piece is thinking about the role of textiles and modularity. You can kind of imagine this being a textile that would be worn by an Inca soldier, where a lot of the checkerboard patterns would be on the front of the tunics. In 2017, I was invited to produce a solo presentation at the Queens Museum. And for a long time, I'd been thinking about how can I present my drawings to the scale that I've always wanted to present them at. And so I was fortunate to scale up these drawings that I had been making with gymnasium flooring, these kind of fragmented lines that represented different games and different fields, and have them exist in the same space. So this fragmentation, I'll show this from above, this fragmentation, this kind of recognizability of the imagery, what's being played, what's not being played, whether it's in construction or deconstruction, was something I was always really fascinated by. The role of the field and gymnasiums. This arena where there was multiple usage, where context was really important. The way we thought about rules and how we subscribe to rules was something that was of interest to me. It's also of interest to me because it echoes a lot of the history that I have growing up in New York and going to indoor soccer leagues with my dad, who is a referee and also a professional soccer player in Ecuador. And so my connection to sports is not entirely one of competitive spirit, but also one of kind of convening and coming together. And growing up in New York, these indoor soccer leagues were made up of a wide range of the Latin American diaspora. So it wasn't just people from Ecuador, people from everywhere, from the Caribbean, from South America, from Central America. So sport to me really represented something that was a place of ritual, a place of tradition. And so this, I say that to kind of give a little bit of the background for the drawings and why I'm using gymnasium flooring. So when in 2017 was invited to do something at the Queens Museum, I thought it would be a really great way to pay tribute to these pathways and these communities that are coming from a large geographic area like Latin America, where the history of that geography was also, the boundaries have shifted over the years. And so I felt like representing the 4 geographic areas of the Inca Empire with the 4 Huifalas of that area above it was a nice way of kind of responding to the community in Queens. And this piece is from 2017. You can see a little bit of the evolution of the floor. I was actually invited to create a site-specific piece in Buffalo, where we sourced a whole gymnasium floor from a local reused warehouse. And really serendipitously, through what was scavenged, I was able to recreate a design that is reminiscent of the Ulama game in Central America. And so what you can kind of see right in the middle is this capital I shape that is indicative of the architecture from Central America and the role of ulama, which is a precursor to soccer, and the role of that in the development of architecture and culture over the span of 700 years. The game of ulama actually has a history of 700 years, and you can see that through the ruins and through the architecture of that game and the space it required expanded over time. So as I placed this down, I also thought it would be a really great way to investigate the way these pieces on muslin, the way drawing and painting and textiles interacted with this, so people can move in and out of the space and see these pieces from the front and from the back, and kind of interact with them as sculpture and painting simultaneously. And the final piece is called Los Desaparecidos, the Arbiter of Time. This piece was dedicated to my dad and also incorporates the role of my mom's history as a seamstress, which continues to now, and thinking about materiality in a very specific way. So for this piece, all the materials are coming from the role of a seamstress. The work is on muslin. There's pattern paper being used. There's gold leaf shining from behind the pattern paper, and all the colors that are kind of radiating from the center are done from using wax paper that's used for transferring images. And I wanted to incorporate the imagery of the quipu into this piece and connect that to the role that my dad had as a referee and thinking about the 45 minutes of a game, but also this notion of being an arbiter of time and thinking about what it means to start and stop time, what it means to consider fair and foul, what it means to consider what's offside and what's onside. And so the connection to the quipu as this very present artifact in which some cases the history of it and its specific context, it's unavailable to us, but using that as a model to connect it to my dad's role as this person that goes in and out of time. Yeah, so I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ronny. We are doing really great on time. I want to call in Esperanza.
Esperanza, your audio is turned off.
Thank you. And I'm hoping I'm doing this right. Okay, can you see this image? Right. So first I want to say thank you so much, Mary, for thinking about me. I'm very excited to be with such wonderful, beautiful people, brilliant people. Ronny's work is amazing. William's work is amazing. And I hope that, oh, and by the way, I went to McCall's in 2019 and had a fabulous time. So here I go. So my work is coming from a very personal place. The strangeness of being Latin American in the United States, and especially New York, is a bizarre animal because people make a lot of assumptions, and all of us are like another universe unto ourselves. So the first image you see of the three people, that is my grandmother, who is obviously Afro-Indigenous with some European. And that is my grandfather, who was blinded as a very young man. So that had a huge impact on me. The other image is of my cousin, who is a bullfighter, and I come from generations of bullfighting in Colombia, but also, of course, in Peru, in Mexico, and Spain, and Ecuador, So I am praying that it'll go to the next image. I don't know how to do this, oh my God. I don't know how to go to the next one. Oh, look, it did that. So since I'm a bit older than you guys, my history goes back a little bit further. And so just wanted to show a piece that I had a solo show at the Newburgh Museum, which was very impactful. Like Mary, I was a young mother, and so it colored my world. It colored the way that I worked. And so that's my daughter's baby chair, which is the centerpiece of this work. And the piece is covered with 500 roses. And I repeat the number just because of our colonial history, 500, 400, 500 and more is the way I see it. And it's, Ronny, you have a child now. It's this anxiety of how the world is going to treat your child or your children, especially when they are not belonging to the specifics of how the country identifies itself when you're outside of that. So that's so this piece is called Throne. And then the next piece, I guess I'm not doing this, someone else is doing it. It's like magic. This is a piece that I did at the Bronx Museum. And I did this piece when I was first dating with my husband, Michael. I was very much in love, and I was kind of spooked at how people got so involved in my relationship. They wanted to know a million things, and I thought, wow, that's weird. So I created this piece. It's got like hundreds of clay flowers that are strung together, this bed that has like a transparent covering. In Colombia, we call it cubre el hecho, which literally means cover the deed. I think that's like the best name in the world. So, this idea of like, do you even have any privacy? So we could go to the next one. And this was a very important piece I did at Socrates Sculpture Park. I had a residency. I had traveled through Europe and Northern Africa, and I knew the east coast of this country. I didn't dare to travel in the rest yet because I was very anxious about the way I was treated and my family was treated when I was a child. So I went to Europe instead. And everywhere there was the grave to the unknown soldier, and I was like, oh, come on. Like, women were baking cookies? I mean, we were doing stuff. We were involved. We were doing so much to affect the culture and the state of the political situation in so many parts of the world. So this was one of the pieces I did, and this is one of the first times, early time, that I was using the beads and the hammered flowers, and the figure was carved from a New York pier with a chainsaw and a grinder. So we could go to the next one. And so because I did that piece at Socrates, I thought a lot about the height, because that other piece was like over 13 feet. And it just was a remarkable thing to look at something that went up so high. But I thought I didn't want to work with the weight because that piece had a metal core, which was 1.5 tons. I didn't want to work with that weight. So I came up with this idea of working on crocheted beaded chains, and all the work. You can actually pick this piece up. It's not very heavy, but I wanted to work on with that kind of the feeling of the earlier work. And this piece is called Suspended Thoughts. It's from having grown up in New York. It just seemed that everybody felt like their belief was the belief, and your beliefs were wrong. And this idea of competing religions, which we're still living under. And I just thought if I hung everything together, and some of the things that I had on Suspended Thoughts were amulets that I collected from Europe, North Africa, some were Latin American. So I just wanted to give it a visual, and it has a mirror below it. So when you look at it, it's as if it was going this perpetual dilemma about belief. We can go to the next one. And this piece, I was working in a residency in Westchester, and I was affected by the death of a child, the death of a child's mother, I should say. And it really upset me. It was one of those situations where a woman disappears to make room for someone else. It impacted me a lot, and I thought about what women give up for this idea of stability, the big house, the marriage, the comfort. That is so much that is given up, especially by women who are immigrants who feel like they're going to improve their lives, you know, have a better life than their families would in Latin America. And so I made this piece, which was kind of a beautiful event. The frescoes are all details of injuries to a woman's body. And it's got hundreds of alabaster beads that are strung, that, you know, I strung myself. And alabaster is real delicate. It's really beautiful. It's luminous. But if you step on it, you crush it. So I thought, you know, like an imagery of what a human being is. You know, luminous, beautiful, easily crushed. So we can go to the next one. So this talk really made me like go through my work and think about my life and what I've done. So it made me very contemplative. So this piece is called Cumbia, and Cumbia is originally from Colombia. It's a dance that is believed to have originated in the area of Magdalena and the coast from about 1648. It's considered the oldest dance in Latin America. And when it was originally danced, and I'm sure it's still danced like that in some places, women wore a cone on their head that had a flame, because the calendarias, as they were called, they were parties, celebrations, dances where people could choose their mate. So the women had a torch on their head, and the men carried a torch in their hands. So they lit up the area that they were dancing in, so they could choose their mate. And often it was like, if you were a really good dancer, you had a higher possibility of finding a loved one, someone that would love you. But over one of the eyes are the emerald chip, which is right, it's the surface right before the emeralds. You know, and it's just looking at the situation, and that created so much of what we call Latin America, is just the lust for the gold, for the silver, for the emeralds, you know, was the engine behind the colonization. And so that is why she has emerald chips over her eye. We could go to the next one. And this is Aftermath. This was a piece that I created because it was just wearing me out to hear how bodies were being discovered all over Latin America, you know, in what was once Mexico in the United States, and that the death of people, either through brutality or with the struggle of trying to get to a better place, it was just very common in the news for a long time, and it didn't seem to impact change very much, as we could see with what happened when Trump came about. It just got worse. And so this is a clay with metal chain. I wanted to create an image of the disappeared, what remains of a human being. And, you know, each one of those human beings had thoughts and ideas, and had ideas about what their futures would be. So it's like this futureless moment. We can go to the next one. So this is one of my favorite works. This is called La Cordobesa, and it's named after my cousin, who was one of the first bullfighters in Latin America. Women were allowed to bullfight on foot in the arena in 1974, and she was one of the first who fought in Colombia. The picture I showed you earlier is her daughter. So it's many generations of bullfighters in my family. And so I had this terrible bus accident, and I had been an Afro-Latin dancer and teacher, taught for 20 years through residencies. And I got just so frustrated that this stupid accident had happened, that while I was recuperating for 4 months, I just like cut up all my dance ensembles, all the shawls, everything I had, all the students' shawls. I just kept cutting. And then I got this residency at the Joe Mitchell Center, and I brought it with me, and miracle, something happened that I didn't expect. And it was very, very exciting and just wonderful to see how people saw me working. A friend of mine gave me a lot of the green colored glass pieces. It was beautiful. The Joe Mitchell Center gave me the top of the chair. It was great. And it just opened up this whole new idea about hybridity, because we're always being forced to believe that it's all one thing, and the world is like super hybrids, and especially the United States, the Americas. We can go to the next. So when I was really, really young, in my very early 20s, I went to Tunisia and I met this fabulous family. Just like the most beautiful people I've ever seen. Very, very dark, extraordinarily beautiful. And while talking to the woman, she was playing music for me, which sounded like it was straight out of Colombia. It was just kind of shocking. And she made food for me that tasted so Latin American. It's just this whole thing about where do ideas come from? It's like in Latin America, which so much is given. The Spaniards gave us everything, or a lot of things, and it, just being there was amazing. But as we were talking, she was telling me she lived in Paris. She was Tunisian. She came back to Tunisia to try to get her parents to come with her. They had lived as slaves. They didn't realize for a very long time that slavery ended. And they chose not to leave because they're like, how are we going to live in a world that we don't know? It just broke my heart. Like, how can that exist? But they lived in the middle of the Sahara where there was no communication. So I just thought Tunisia is an example, but that repeats in so many places where people are lived as, their lives are compromised and they're forced to be, servants of some kind, workers of some kind, for economic reasons, of course. Next image.
Esperanza, we're at a minute.
Okay, I'll just do this one. So this is also another one of my favorite pieces, and it's just talking about the extraction of gold. I tried to give a visual to what would be like 15 minutes of extraction. Over 100 tons of gold were, I would say, abducted from Latin America in the first, less than 100 years. It is part of the monarchy in Europe became very wealthy because of what it did to Latin America. It's like sometimes I think people don't recognize the connection between Latin America and Europe, but especially Spain. Thank you.
Thank you, Esperanza. Mary, I'd love to hear from you and what you've been up to.
Yes. So first, everyone can hear me all right?
Yes.
So I wanted to thank everyone for accepting the invitation to participate on this panel. I was really excited to let everyone do it. I admire everyone's work on this panel. I'm really thankful and grateful that for the past 20 years, give or take, I've met all you guys and all you guys have been projects. I think the reason that I wanted you all to participate in this is because I feel like you know my work very well. And I think that we have a simpatico relationship with each other visually, but also culturally. So I just felt like our work, even though doesn't look the same, it definitely has a very similar reference and visual and cultural history that is impacting the way that we go about making the work, but also how we speak about the work and how we relate to intersecting communities within our own space at different times, from where we grew up, as well as how we were raised, our value system, our beliefs, how we were educated, our ideas about family, and what we sort of bring forth when we study and we research and when we make work. I have had separate conversations with everyone on this panel about, ideas and process, and I've always learned so much. And, you know, that's why we wanted everyone on this panel to sort of have a moment together. I'm really grateful that I have this space, and I'm not presenting too many images because I have all the work behind me. And I'm kind of in this weird space where when you're in the middle of making something, you know, I can't talk about too many other things but what I'm making, but I do want to share the first image that's up on the screen now. It's called Curves and Points, and it is made of bamboo, painted bamboo, and string that is tethered together to cascade in this specific sequence. There are 9 panels, and each panel has 45 pieces of bamboo, and they're all marked in a system of dashes. I am really inspired by abstraction and sort of coded visual language of sacred geometry, specific to Indigenous and pre-colonized cultures, both African and Indigenous. And so I am really a lover of the visual language, and look to that to sort of inspire both the palette and the way that things and material are used in the work. So I chose bamboo because it's an organic material, but also because physically it gives, and it has weight, but it's super flexible, and depending on how you use it, it can bend and grow and create all these curves. So I was excited to start using this material when I did, because I think I almost, as soon as I realized I was going to use it, I was really excited about what it was going to do in terms of the visual network of it. And I knew that, and I specifically made it so that it could be installed in a variety of different heights and widths, so that it can contract and expand depending on space. So this piece was installed at the Queen's Museum originally, and it was about half the width and a third of the height because of the weight, the space that was occupied. And then here is it at Snack-Millen in Brooklyn, and it's like twice the size. It basically, you know, when you walk underneath it and when you walk past it, it feels like it's moving, and it has this weird cascade visual effect that almost looks like, you know, you're sort of flying hyperspeed in the spaceship, because it has these little dots, sort of dragging. So in all of my work, I kind of consider how it's utilized, but how people see it come to the work. And so it's always talking about space, and diverting perspectives. So depending on where you are, where your placement, your physical placement is, you'll see it and experience it. You can go to the next image. So this piece was brick, and it's a combination floor and wall piece. Chacana is a reference to the cross, and a lot of my work has Indigenous textile and curriculum embedded symbols in it. So the wall piece has Chacana symbol, which is sort of like a pyramid down, and then it's upside down. And it's seen in a lot of textiles and masonry work in South America and all of Latin America, actually, because it's synonymous with the marker. And the wall piece is inspired by textile work as well, palette of it. Each square was designed to be displayed symmetrically, so that the whole thing looks like a symmetrical piece. And they're individually incised squares, but each sort of panel can be separated and can be displayed even wider if I had more space. But they're anchored and they're sort of pivoting up or pivoting down, so they look like kind of like scales. So they're taught. It's sort of meant for you to notice separate angles and depending on where you're standing in the perspective of the piece. The 4 pieces is kind of a labyrinth style geometric piece of in gold and black, and it is similar sort of aesthetic of sort of finding yourself in a space and trying to navigate it and having a variety of perspectives and ways to come into the space, ways to come into the space. That's, you can go back to just a little more.
Mary, I want to give you a minute warning.
Yeah. So I just wanted to just include a discussion on like, you know, how the reason that I'm engaging with African and Indigenous diaspora in the work directly, because I feel like there is always this need to separate both experiences in US or American history or culture. And I think that outside of the US, and I think most felt, I don't know if it's mostly by people of the diaspora in Latin America, but I know that in the Caribbean, South America, Central America, Mexico, there is this understanding of the overlapping histories. And I think we feel it more when we come to the States, or our parents come to the States, and we have this sort of introduction of a lived experience. And I agree with William Ronny. We sort of align ourselves with the African American experience because it's so similar historically, but it's also mirrors our understanding of our own history. Sometimes, you know, we forget that Spanish is a colonial language, and that, you know, understanding Spanish and English, you know, it kind of gives us a weird understanding of place in terms of history, but it describes the colonial overlapping. I'm not sure if I'm making complete sense, but that's that and the African experience, the Indigenous experience. Our histories are really tied together. And I think that visually, my work tends to, or I'm trying to respond to those histories and give myself and give us a place, a place to anchor ourselves visually that is familiar, that is about our history, and that is about things that are beautiful and things that are important and things that are bad. So.
Thank you, Mary. I think that helps us to maybe approach a little bit of conversation just to hear from everyone. Really, there are so many key points of how we're thinking about the intertwined history, also history that's raised, history that has to be dug up over and over again, that's misunderstood or that becomes trendy and appropriated. Really thinking about what is authenticity, what is authentic to us, and the experience in the United States as a diaspora is its very own experience in that way. And it's its very own experience in how we're approaching our history rooted in colonialism, indigeneity, and the African diaspora, and how it really comes to term with itself as we're presenting it in a contemporary setting. You know, we see all of these different ways in which all of your works represent, and it always feels like, oh, it represents something. I get it. I see it. At least I think that's how I've been able to approach so much and just sit with that sense of, oh, I get it. And most of the time I don't know where it's coming from because I don't need to know the specificities to acknowledge it, to respect it, and to see how closely knit it is to a long lost history, to a diaspora, and to an immigrant experience in some sense. And well, that is all to say that I think something I'd like to ask about the material of what you're working with, about sculpture, about objects, your relationships to objects. I see them as something that is mapping, something that is architectural, also something that holds a lot of memory. I'm wondering if you can speak to a little bit more about how you're approaching sculpture, how it lives with you, and how you want folks to approach it. Maybe not to any specific piece, but really just to talk to me about objects. I think there's been such an interesting journey that you've had presented with objects, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And that's really just an open question. We don't have a lot of time, but I think we can wrap. You okay, Will? No.
He was just sick for a long time, so we just our conversation, despite just recovering.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I think something that prompted the question for me was this mapping of spaces, going from like the gymnasium to these kind of altar pieces, Esperanza, that you make. Well, of course, the kind of the mapping of these architectural spaces of correct me if I'm wrong, the apartment in Chicago, and Mary, also very much considering your audience and how we're approaching the sculpture. It just seems to me like each one of them have these contemplating aspect to them, that as the audience, we are prompted to contemplate and think through how we're approaching this object, or stepping into the object.
I think that one of the things I admire about everyone's work here is that there is that sort of respect for material and material objects having the energy or its own presence on its own, so that we, offer that in the work, a space to be almost a marker of, its own self and a marker of our interpretation of whatever it is that inspires us to make it. So they become sort of not just, they become very charged objects and objects and not the sort of contemporary material, like I can buy this thing kind of, but more in sort of, waka object, and venerable object that you want to keep and that you value, and that you're putting all this energy and placing all this history, and spending all this time making it, and spending all this time really like researching and measuring and recreating or translating what the material could be, what its potential is. So I think that in everyone's work, that's what I feel is what makes it super strong, because you come to the work and it feels like more than just what it is in terms of just the material. It's charged. So I think that, you know, everyone in this panel does that super well. And I admire how everyone does it individually.
Thank you, Mary. Ronny?
Off of what you're saying, Mary, the materiality of it, I think, is also something that we tend to go to maybe solely to transform it, to find a new kind of way of presenting its significance to ourselves and then potentially to the culture that we want to represent, whatever material that might be. And there's also familiarity there and the ability to transform it beyond being familiar and into something that is more resounding. You know, like I keep thinking about everybody's work, and I keep thinking about like a lens that is like looking through many times, many points in history, many ways of working, and maybe because of that, and trying to distill that, there's a sense of like wanting to create a space to process it, right? And so, and trying to create a place to process it, it's potentially a place of contemplation, or a place that it's slow to the read. I don't know if that's the best way to kind of explain it, but there's because it requires time to kind of process the various layers that we all like are very attuned to and sensitive to. And so I think in a way it's maybe a tribute to the audiences that we want to bring into the conversation by having space to have that moment to process. I hope that makes a bit of sense.
Esperanza, your mic.
I have not gotten to know William, but I would love to. But I know Ronny and Mary, I think, pretty well. And it's like, what I'm fascinated with is like, it's a different, each person has their own kind of intelligence. They're sparked by things in a very specific way. Like I know Mary is like, you know, a numbers person. This is like a mathematical mind, you know, and with Ronny, I mean, I can see how you can dissect things and take them apart. And I think like for me, a lot of the work that I've done working with elders, you know, in legacy projects, getting to know like the original stories of a lot of things impacts my work, even though they may not have been Colombian, but just recognizing that there's so many like little histories hidden everywhere. People who know so much, but you know, you don't realize how much they know. And I'm fascinated by that. And William, your work is really beautiful. And I would love to get to know your brain because I mean, I think that's what comes out in the end is our reinterpretation of the same thing that everybody's seeing, but each one of us do a slightly different version. You know, it's the filters are different, you know. And of course, Eva, you have an amazing brain. I'm fascinated by the way you take things apart.
Thank you for that, y'all. Will, you want to jump in with anything?
Was there a specific question posed?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think thinking very much about material and the way folks are approaching material. But I think I'm also very much interested in how you feel about your audience. You know, it's very taxing to teach and reteach and teach history through a lot of these pieces. But is that even a concern?
Well, I don't. I tend not to separate visual art from when I walk out of my office space or my studio space or my home or my vehicle or when I travel. I don't turn it on or turn it off to think about one specific or a broad specific audience. I've always approached being a cultural practitioner as a conduit of information, of disrupting, of seeking to enlighten myself, and in the process mentor and share with others. It's a life project. In terms of matter or materials, which to me is one and the same, I tend to work in a very practical way. I don't necessarily keep or archive my work. The two examples that you saw are you rely on materials that are later donated or discarded. I'll take them home with me. The idea is the most important part. So a conversation would be with people I may know, people I may not know, in public spaces or in private spaces. The sharing of that information is to me is the most important way to disrupt, I believe, the norms that people tend to gravitate towards, which can be comforting, familiar, because oftentimes human beings are afraid of the unknown. If it's a person from a different country, religion, race, or language, people tend to distance themselves or be afraid of or stereotype. So I think having an exchange, disrupting those types of limited norms can accomplish sometimes a lot more than what I conceive of is to be art making. So those are my pros and cons. I tend to often reference Jean-Michel Basquiat, not because he's popular now, but because he was polylingual in everything he did. Mm-hmm. A lot of people can relate to the work, different entry points. But I don't think his work has been researched or archived and spoken about in a very deep manner or a rigorous manner. Not yet, anyway. Definitely the spiritual part is not part of the conversation. So, but that's something I wanted to just illuminate for a second. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. I definitely I see that role of sharing, of the abundance of knowledge, and of each one of your roles as educators as well. And in really thinking about what it means to study and to break down, to construct and deconstruct how ideas are transferred. And I have to say that the more and more that we study, our own histories, that we study unknown histories, anything related back to the resistance, resilience, and survival of peoples who are elders and descendants, it means that we carry that will to engage, to reread, and to survive. And it also means that we have that responsibility to continue to engage in beautiful ways. and to present that knowledge. And certainly that's how it's been presented to me, and how I hope to continue to do that. It isn't at all separated from day-to-day job and work. It is just completely woven together. And I really appreciate that. And I hope to continue our conversations, to continue in community. And I hope to see you all soon in person, to engage even more. Mary, thank you so much for bringing us together. To the McCall Center for putting this space together, this platform. And I know that these conversations are really not over, and it feels very, honestly, just colonial to even run a clock and have 1 hour to talk and talk, when we know that these ideas and conversations are for. So we'll leave it at that. I hope you all have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone, for participating. It's really wonderful to see everyone.
Thank you, Mary.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate you taking your time out and sharing your practices.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Buenas noches. Gracias.
Long and prosper.
Okay, should I end?